Tonight at 10, Boris Johnson manages to survive as Prime Minister, but he suffers a substantial rebellion among Conservative MPs in tonight's confidence vote.
The vote in favour of having confidence in Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes. And therefore, I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
It means that over 40% of the Parliamentary Party declared a lack of confidence in their leader, much higher than many had expected. Mr. Johnson's team insisted the result was decisive, a renewal of his leadership mandate, they said, and it was time to move forward.
I think it's a convincing result, a decisive result, and what it means is that as a government we can move on and focus on the stuff that I think really matters.
As the votes were cast at Westminster this evening, and after the result, the rebels said that things had now changed fundamentally.
I hadn't expected more than a third of the Parliamentary Party expressing no confidence in the Prime Minister. That is severely damaging for him and his reputation.
We'll have the latest from Westminster tonight, from Downing Street here, on what the result means for Boris Johnson's future. We'll also have the day's other main news at 10. Ukraine's President Zelensky visits frontline troops in the Donbass as the UK announces it'll supply long-range missiles to the country. Are the world's promises to reduce carbon emissions being kept? We look at the pledges more than 6 months on from the COP26 summit in Glasgow. And significant travel disruption continues, with more flights cancelled and some people left stranded after the half-term holiday.
And I'm Martine Croxall. Join us for the papers at 10:30 and 11:30 tonight on the BBC News Channel for an in-depth look at all of the front pages.
Well, a very good evening from Downing Street, where we're having a bit of a musical performance at the end of the road, so please excuse the noise. Boris Johnson is still in office as Prime Minister, despite a significant rebellion among Conservative MPs in tonight's vote of confidence. The result was declared barely an hour ago, and the scale of Mr. Johnson's victory, by some 63 votes, was described by Downing Street as decisive, that was their word, but was said by rebels to be a clear sign that Mr. Johnson's days as leader were numbered. Well, under the current rules, Mr. Johnson can't now face another challenge to his leadership for 12 months. So let's take a look at the result. There were 211 Conservative MPs declaring their confidence in the Prime Minister, while 148 declared no confidence in their leader. Number 10 said the result was a renewal of the Prime Minister's mandate. We'll have detail and reaction, but first our political editor Chris Mason brings the story of the vote and the result, which many people are seeing at Westminster as a substantial blow to the Prime Minister's authority.
After months of awkward questions for Boris Johnson, weeks of mounting speculation and a day of intense, public, sometimes angry argument, the moment. A verdict, the result, with yes, the potential to remove Mr. Johnson as Prime Minister, but also shape his future in the job.
The vote in favour of having confidence in Boris Johnson as leader was 211 votes, and the vote against was 148 votes. And therefore, I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
A mathematical victory for Boris Johnson, but boy, those numbers are awkward for him. More than 40% of his MPs labelling him a liability the country would be better off without. But he insisted.
I think it's an extremely good, positive, conclusive, decisive result, which enables us to move on, to unite and to focus on delivery. And that is exactly what we're going to do.
Westminster is now digesting the result, those wanting Mr. Johnson out beaten tonight, but insisting they're not defeated.
I think, frankly, it's very bad indeed. I was expecting that we might make three figures. I hadn't expected a third, more than a third, of the parliamentary party expressing no confidence in the Prime Minister. That is severely damaging for him and his reputation.
For the opposition parties today, a chance to stand back and watch their opponents in a mess.
This evening, the Conservative Party had a decision to make, to show some backbone or to back Boris Johnson. The British public are fed up with a Prime Minister who promises big but never delivers.
The day began with Sir Graham Brady announcing that the moment some Conservative MPs longed for and others desperately hoped to avoid had come.
The threshold of 15% of the parliamentary party seeking a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister has been passed. Therefore, a vote of confidence will take place within the rules of the 1922 committee.
Within moments, the public argument began, Cabinet Ministers offering their best spin on things. Do you accept that the bottom line is a vote of confidence is bad news for any leader?
I think that I've already said to some other broadcasters, it's the privilege of any Member of Parliament to choose to request a new leader. I don't think that's the right choice, but I'm not going to condemn people.
How can the Prime Minister possibly recover from this?
Well, by winning. And at one vote win is enough.
Two Cabinet Ministers turning out together. What does that say? It suggests to me that you're worried.
Actually, I would say it suggests unity and strength, actually. We're both in the same position of supporting the Prime Minister. I think it's the right thing for our country and our party to draw a line under this tonight and move forward and get back to focusing on the core issues that affect all of our constituents.
Yes, I echo what Brandon's just said. I really urge my Conservative colleagues in Parliament to unite today.
Supporters in the foreground, critics wanting to be heard too, as the Prime Minister's anti-corruption champion decided to resign.
Leadership and integrity are absolutely central to the ministerial code. They are baked into it. They run through it like a stick of rock.
So the
and I'm afraid is that means he's broken the ministerial code, and that means, as a result, that it's a resignation matter for any minister, and it also has to be a resignation matter for me as well.
And there was another junior resignation later. John Lamont stood down as a ministerial aide to the Foreign Secretary. Enter next a potential successor as Prime Minister. Jeremy Hunt took on Boris Johnson last time and lost. Today he tweeted, "We are no longer trusted. Change or lose. I'll be voting for change." And if you think that sounds blunt, listen to this response to it from the Culture Secretary.
I'm incredibly disappointed that Jeremy Hunt, who said throughout, I'm not going to challenge the Prime Minister while there's a war in Ukraine, has come out and challenged the Prime Minister on the day Russia sends rockets into Kyiv.
A party rowing in public, a result some distance from definitive. The questions about Boris Johnson's future won't go away.
Well, let's go live to the Houses of Parliament, just a stone's throw away from here, and Chris is there. Let's talk about the margin of Mr Johnson's victory, Chris. Were you surprised by how relatively modest it was, and what does that mean?
More importantly, Huw, those on the Prime Minister's side were surprised. At lunchtime today, I talked to one minister, a loyalist as far as Boris Johnson is concerned, who didn't think the numbers would be anywhere near where they ended up. They thought it might creep into three figures. They thought it might reach a third of the parliamentary party, around 120, not nearly 150, not more than 4 out of 10 Conservative MPs concluding that they would be better off without Boris Johnson. And that means tonight this will not go away. These moments are always difficult for a party leader. The best they can hope is suppress the number as low as possible. That's why we saw his supporters saying a victory by one is a victory. They were managing that expectation, and so tonight they can say they did a lot better than that. But the key political question, rather than arithmetic, mathematical question, is where does this leave the Prime Minister? It leaves him in a situation where the rebels will think they can still dislodge him sooner rather than later. They will carry on making the argument that the party would be better off without him. For now, Boris Johnson will take a deep breath. This whole conversation, though, will simply not go away.
Chris, for now, many thanks. Chris Mason there for us at the Houses of Parliament with the latest analysis after the vote, which came in just about an hour ago. again, apologies, quite a bit of noise over there, so I hope you're getting all the message that we're delivering here loud and clear. There were a number of reasons why many Conservative MPs decided to vote against the Prime Minister tonight. Chris was mentioning some of them earlier. History has shown that it can be hard for Prime Ministers to recover even when they win a confidence vote, as Mr Johnson has done. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, looks at Boris Johnson's leadership and what could lie ahead for him.
He won the Conservatives their biggest victory in decades.
Good morning, everybody, my friends. Well, we did it.
So why, just 2.5 years later, have so many of Boris Johnson's own MPs turned on him? In the early days, breaking the Brexit deadlock was the priority and a huge plus point with colleagues. Then, an unprecedented pandemic derailed any plans Mr Johnson may have had.
You must stay at home.
Some trace his problems back to other choices, sticking by a divisive advisor, Dominic Cummings, who'd alienated Conservative MPs, clashed with the Prime Minister's wife, and was then accused of breaking COVID rules. It's Mr Johnson's leadership style that concerns others.
I think he did a brilliant job over Brexit, for which the country and the Conservative Party should always be grateful. But he does not, in my view, govern in the way that a modern Prime Minister governs, through the normal processes of the state. It feels a bit more like a medieval monarch governing through a court, and you absolutely cannot govern modern Britain in that way.
Some Tory MPs complain about a lack of direction, from U-turns over free school meals to an embarrassing climb down after Mr Johnson tried to change parliamentary rules on standards to protect one of his friends.
3, 2, 1.
That led to the loss of an ultra-safe Conservative seat. But it's the law-breaking parties in Downing Street which have done most damage. A police investigation, a fine for the Prime Minister, and another inquiry looming into whether he lied to Parliament. Polls suggest the scandal has dented his popularity. Some even booed his arrival at St Paul's Cathedral for Jubilee celebrations.
He does have real political abilities, and he does have, I think, an instinct to be able to position himself where new voters who've not voted for the Conservative Party before can do that. But he's got these huge flaws which have always been a problem for him in every office that he's held, and I think those things will continue to cause a problem for him.
Winning confidence votes doesn't always end well. John Major was victorious in 1995.
It is time to put up or shut up.
But lost the general election 2 years later. Theresa May won hers, but resigned within 6 months.
A core part of the Conservative Party don't want Boris Johnson as their Prime Minister, and that makes it difficult when you're trying to get policy through, win votes in Parliament and campaign around the country in these by-elections and in the run-up to any general election.
There are many reasons behind this unhappiness with Boris Johnson. For some, it's the economy. They want tax cuts. Others have been sacked by him or overlooked for promotion. Others talk about his character, saying he lacks integrity and leadership skills. But most will be making a very simple judgment. Is he still a vote winner for the Conservatives? Boris Johnson was never going to win over all the critics in his party, but he hopes the victory tonight has silenced them for now. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's remind you then of the result of that confidence vote, which was announced just over an hour ago. Boris Johnson has won the vote of no confidence, as I told you, by 211 votes to 148, a majority of 63. And in terms of a percentage, just under 59% of Tory MPs voted for the Prime Minister, and just over 41% voted against him, declared no confidence in him. Let's go live then to my colleague Vicky Young, who's in the central lobby of Parliament, for the latest there. Vicky?
Well, Huw, Downing Street said earlier today that a win was a win, no matter what the margin of victory was. But I do think that this was probably a bit more uncomfortable for the Prime Minister than he would have hoped. If you think about it, 40% of his own MPs don't want him in the job. Let's just take the temperature of the Conservative Party. First of all, I'm joined by the former Minister, Shailesh Vara. Now, you back the Prime Minister. Why do you think so many of your colleagues don't agree with you?
Well, actually, if you look at the figures, more MPs supported him this time than they did the last time that there was a ballot amongst MPs. When there was the leadership contest, Boris Johnson won with a 51% majority over Jeremy Hunt. We now have had another ballot amongst MPs, and he's had 59% of the vote. And
but he is the Prime Minister. He's done worse, relatively speaking, than Theresa May did.
We're not in the business of comparing with other prime ministers. Theresa's circumstances were different. There wasn't a war in Europe. There weren't a whole lot of other issues. This isn't like for like. This is a prime minister who got an 80-seat majority at the last general election, the largest majority of any Conservative prime minister since 1987. I think what is important now, Vicky, is that we recognise that those who wish to remove the prime minister, they wanted a ballot. We've had that ballot. A ballot has produced a result, and that result is 8% more than before amongst MPs.
But there are Labour MPs tonight who I've spoken to who say this is the best result for them because the Prime Minister is damaged, he's wounded, but he stays in place, and they now think that he is an electoral asset for them.
What I think is the best thing now is that the Conservative Party respects the ballot result and stays united. Parties will often lose elections because they're disunited. Look at recent history. It's parties that are disunited that end up in opposition. What I very much hope is that the Conservative Party will now stay united and that we'll work forward to looking after the interests of our constituents and the country rather than having a conversation amongst ourselves.
OK, that was a call for unity there, but we do know that in the Conservative Party not everyone agrees with that view. Andrew Bridgen is one of those who thinks the Prime Minister should now go. He's won though, hasn't he? This is over.
He has, but it's a Pyrrhic victory for him. He's got a far worse result than Theresa May had a couple of years ago, and of course the vote that brought down Mrs Thatcher. Both of those Prime Ministers went on to resign. I just hope that, given the mood of the public, the vote we've had here tonight, that the Cabinet would go and tell the Prime Minister that, in Steve Baker's words, the gig's up.
But they won't, will they? And I don't think he'll resign. That's what most people think. So what can you do now to remove a leader that you don't want?
Well, we were told at the 22 meeting before this vote, the Prime Minister said, vote for me tonight and we end all this uncertainty. Well, that's not going to be the case. We've got the Privileges Committee looking into whether the Prime Minister deliberately misled Parliament. That's not going to report till October. This matter's going to rumble on. We've got two very challenging by-elections at either end of the country. The pressure's still on the Prime Minister, and ultimately...
You can't get rid of him, can you? He's now safe for a year under the current rules.
He is, but rules can be changed in extremis. I think, I'll make a prediction, we're going to have a new Prime Minister, a new leader of the Conservative Party by party conference this year.
OK, that's the view there of Andrew Bridgen. So as you can see there, Labour MPs pretty delighted with all of this. They say that the Conservative Party is completely divided over this issue. The Prime Minister, though, determined to carry on in his job.
Vicky, many thanks. Vicky Young there with guests in the Palace of Westminster. So that's the view there in the Palace of Westminster. But what about voters elsewhere beyond Westminster? What do they make of today's developments and indeed of Mr Johnson's leadership? Our correspondent Alex Forsyth has spent the day in Newcastle-under-Lyme, one of the constituencies which at the last election Boris Johnson succeeded in converting from Labour to Conservative.
Green signs her name as Elizabeth R. What does the R stand for?
At the weekly quiz at Wolstanton Social Club, there was one question that wouldn't win points, but was on many minds. Will Boris Johnson keep his job?
359 ballots were cast.
So after the votes were counted in Westminster, what of the verdict here?
He always comes up smelling of roses.
Are you pleased?
No. No, definitely not.
Why not?
Well, I've voted Conservative all my life since I could vote, and I would never vote for Boris Johnson from the minute he took over.
There was no way he was going to go to that.
What do you think about the result, though?
I'm not happy. I'm not happy with him, and I'm the same as my sister. I voted for him.
For others, though, there was less agreement.
He's got us through COVID.
Yeah, he's done all that, and congratulations to him, but he's not fit for office.
Gary had quite a different view from his teammates.
He said, I haven't done anything wrong, and he's been proved that he has. He should go.
He's done great for the country, all through COVID and everything. Cheers, mate.
Hopefully this will put everything to bed now, and that they can concentrate on bigger issues in the country at the moment, which is the cost of living crisis.
Newcastle-under-Lyme was a seat that turned from Labour to the Conservatives for the first time in decades at the last general election. Its Tory MP was one of those who had called on the Prime Minister to go before tonight's vote. At the local garden centre earlier today, Katie and her mum Linda, who was a Conservative voter, explained why they too had lost faith in Boris Johnson.
What put you off Boris Johnson?
We'll get Brexit done and then it's stretched out for how long? Partygate.
That was very sad. We've lost people we've not been able to say goodbye to properly, and they were living it up.
It wasn't a universal view. Jonathan had wanted the Prime Minister to keep his job, saying today was the wrong time for MPs to have moved against him.
What he did was wrong at Partygate. He's been punished and I think we should move on. And at this particular time with Ukraine, I think it's inappropriate. I think they've rushed into it.
The Prime Minister's supporters might have cause to celebrate, or at least breathe a sigh of relief. But perhaps the ultimate question is whether this does blow over for the public, or whether any damage might hang around. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Newcastle-under-Lyme.
Alex there with a view of some voters on the day that the Prime Minister survived an attempt to remove him from office, but saw 148 of his own MPs vote against him. There's more update, more news, more analysis on BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news, and of course you can use the BBC News app. Let's turn to some of the day's other main news now. The UK is to send its first supply of long-range missiles to Ukraine. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said that the missiles will help Ukraine defend itself against future Russian attacks. It comes as Ukrainian officials say that their military has repelled 7 Russian attacks across the Donbas region over the past 24 hours, with intense fighting continuing in Severodonetsk. Our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale, has more details.
Fighting in the city of Severodonetsk has been described as the hottest of the conflict, with relentless Russian artillery strikes reducing the area to rubble and ashes. Ukraine's President Zelensky has called the situation hell. This weekend, sheltered in a building, he made his first visit to troops there, fighting against huge odds. An effort to boost morale.
You are true heroes of our country, Ukraine. You are heroes of war. Because of you, we have and will have our land and our country.
Ukraine's forces are outnumbered and outgunned. Russia's vast arsenal of artillery trying to pummel and break Ukrainian resistance. Both sides are taking heavy casualties. But for Ukraine, more help will soon be on its way. Today, Britain announced it'll be sending this, its most advanced rocket launcher, following the lead of the US, which is supplying Ukraine with a similar system. This British Army version can fire 12 rockets in a minute and has a range of up to 50 miles, further than most of Russia's artillery. The flow of Western weapons has already angered Moscow, though President Putin is also trying to play down its significance.
We believe that the delivery of rocket systems by the United States and some other countries is related to making up for the losses of combat hardware. There is nothing new about that, and this actually changes nothing.
The question now, will these weapons arrive in time to make a difference? And in such small numbers. The US is sending just 4 of its rocket launchers to Ukraine, the UK another 3. But for Ukraine, every little helps. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Now, the UN's climate change chief says efforts to tackle global warming can help create unity between nations at a time of conflict. Patricia Espinosa was speaking as negotiators from almost 200 countries have been meeting in Bonn 6 months after the COP26 climate summit, which took place in Glasgow. Our climate editor Justin Rowlatt has been looking at whether promises made then are being kept.
We've seen more blistering temperatures this year. It hit 51 Celsius in Pakistan last month,
49.2 degrees in Delhi, the highest temperature ever recorded in the Indian capital. Drought is fueling food shortages in Somalia too. And just look at Lake Mead, which provides water to 25 million people in the US and Mexico. Water levels are at their lowest since the 1930s. Countries promised to take action to curb emissions at last year's big UN climate conference in Glasgow.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
But the world has changed since then. Energy and food prices have soared since Russia invaded Ukraine. And as delegates gather in Germany, there's recognition that progress on climate has been slow.
I appeal to all of you, especially in these difficult and challenging times, not to lose hope, not to lose focus, but to use our united efforts against climate change as the ultimate act of unity between nations.
China is one of 34 countries planning new coal power stations. India is planning to reopen 100 coal mines. They say these are stopgaps in a time of crisis, but it's easy to see why the US climate envoy is worried.
The war in Ukraine has given a pass momentarily to some coal usage, but I think it would be an enormous mistake for anybody to believe that Ukraine is a legitimate excuse for building out massive new infrastructure that is going to be there 20, 30, 40 years from now. If that's the choice, then we're cooked.
So we need some good news, and here it is. Despite all the conflict and disagreement in the world, nations are still meeting here to discuss how to tackle climate change. And so long as we're still engaging with the issue, we can still make progress. Justin Rowlatt, BBC News, Bonn.
Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other news in brief. Public inquiry started in Belfast into the physical and mental abuse of vulnerable adults at a hospital in County Antrim. Police have watched more than 300,000 hours of CCTV footage from Muckamore Abbey, with 35 people arrested and more than 70 staff suspended. A retired British geologist, seen here on the left, has been jailed for 15 years for attempting to remove artefacts from Iraq. 66-year-old Jim Fitton collected 12 stones and shards of broken pottery during a recent geology and archaeology tour of the country. Mr. Fitton has insisted he had no idea he was breaking Iraqi laws. Research carried out for the BBC has found the number of properties available to rent has halved since before the pandemic. The industry body Property Marks surveyed 4,000 letting agent branches. It claims many landlords have decided to leave the market, resulting in big price rises for tenants. 3,000 workers in firms across the UK have begun a trial working a 4-day week for no loss of pay. The aim is to see if productivity can be maintained or even increased while working fewer hours, and what happens to business profitability and to workers' job satisfaction. Now, thousands of British holidaymakers are still struggling to get home from half-term breaks after the cancellation of hundreds of flights over the weekend. EasyJet said it had been forced to cancel a further 37 flights today, and other services from Gatwick Airport have also been hit. Our correspondent Tim Muffet has more details.
It had been a great holiday, but Jackie and her children were due to fly back from Tenerife on Saturday. Just before they were due to leave, a text message told them their flight was cancelled.
No representative at the airport, just two Spanish ladies, which were taking a lot of abuse because there was no one from Wizz Air to advise why the flight had been cancelled or what we should do. Being a mum on my own with the children, it was really frightening.
Wizz Air has apologised to passengers and says it's doing all it can to improve communication, but the family can't fly back until Wednesday.
And I guess you're missing school as well.
Yeah, end of year exams, and we're all missing them. And it's the cost. I'm self-employed, so I'm now having to fund accommodation and flights, and I'm not working. I'm cancelling work every day. Already on food, accommodation and flights, I've spent over £1,000.
Around 500 flights were cancelled over the bank holiday weekend. Thousands are believed to be stranded abroad. At Bristol Airport today, most flights were operating normally, but on Saturday, as he set off to visit a friend in Berlin, Colin's flight was cancelled and he had to rebook.
This cost me an extra £770 and meant I got into Berlin a good 9 hours later than originally planned. I meant to fly back from Berlin again today, yet woke up this morning to find that EasyJet had cancelled my flight back.
Staff shortages are driving the disruption, but airports point out that hiring new staff takes time.
If we go back to March the 18th when travel restrictions were lifted, it takes 12 weeks for a staff member to be any use to us in terms of the security vetting procedures. So, we're not at June the 18th yet, so I think that puts into context the challenge ahead of us whilst we onboard as many staff as we can to deliver the summer 22 schedule from Bristol Airport.
In London, travel by tube has also been difficult due to a strike over pensions and potential job cuts. Following days of national celebration, it's been a blue Monday for many travellers. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
Now, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have just shared a photograph of their daughter Lilibet to mark her first birthday. And this is the image, picture taken by the couple's close family friend, Miss San Harriman, at a birthday picnic at Frogmore Cottage in Windsor. The celebration was attended by family and close friends at the weekend. Now, back here in Downing Street, let's return to that news tonight. The vote of confidence in the Prime Minister and the result, which Chris Mason, our political editor, was telling us earlier, was a bit of a shock to the Prime Minister's own team. He did win, but only just, I suppose, in relative terms. What are people telling you now, Chris, about the Prime Minister's own future?
Two things, I think. Historical context first, to put tonight's numbers into some context. So both Theresa May and John Major faced confidence votes. A smaller proportion of their MPs at the time, in the mid-90s and then a couple of years ago, voted against them. Theresa May was gone within 6 months, John Major a landmark or a landslide election defeat a couple of years later. So that's the context. What about the now? A couple of texts I'll read to you, anonymously sent to me this evening. A minister: it's a clear win, we now have to come together. There's a danger of a civil war and the party needs to remember our real opponents are Labour, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats. So that fear around a civil war. And then this from a rebel: it's time for the Cabinet to show some leadership and realise that the game is up for the Prime Minister. In conclusion, we have not seen the last of this.
You think this tension is going to keep on bubbling up and bubbling up. How does it resolve itself then? Is it that the Prime Minister is going to come forward with some big radical policy proposal or initiative, yet another one, in order to deflect? I don't know.
There'll be some of that. I think we'll get a big speech from him later in the week, talking specifically about housing, but also his longer-term plan. I think the rebels will perhaps be quiet for a little bit, but they see this as a loss, but not a defeat. They think they have to remove him because they think otherwise they will lose. And for that reason, they will not stop trying to achieve their ambition.
Chris, we'll talk again tomorrow. Thank you very much. Chris Mason there, our political editor, with some final words here on BBC News at 10. On a rather dramatic evening here at Westminster, Newsnight is starting on BBC Two with more reaction and more analysis. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.